Hello and welcome to The Right Idea, where we discuss the people, policy, and politics that drive Texas. I'm your host, Brian Phillips. I'm the Chief Communications Officer at the Texas Public Policy Foundation, and with me is our now Chief of Policy and Research, not just our research Chief Research Officer, but now he controls the whole thing, policy and research, Derek Cohen. It's good to be back in studio.
Well, it's good to see you, Brian. I was about to say congratulations.
Oh, I had a baby, so that's why I was out.
I think your wife did, but you were there.
My wife had the baby. I was there for some of it. But had a baby and was out for a couple weeks, and so that's why Andrew was.
But you look tan, rested, and ready.
Yeah, no, I was up at 3 o'clock this morning doing all the things that you do.
You look tan and ready.
I need to be hydrated is what I need to be. All right. Well, in addition to all the other things that are going on in everybody's life, the big thing in Austin this week, Derek, is ACL, Austin City Limits Fest, with his, the hordes, the masses around the world come to here for a couple of weeks. And last year, I remember we debated, our hot take at the top of the show was, at what age are you too old to go to a festival like that, like an all-day festival? Mm-hmm. And I think the range was around 38 or 40 is what we decided.
It's younger than we're at now, I think we can most say.
My festival days are long past me at this point. But I thought you had an interesting hot take. And I don't know any of the bands. I know like the Killers and like some of the ones that have been around for a while. I don't know any of the bands, but the band names are very interesting. And you wanted to point out some of the ones that you thought were, based on the names, would be the craziest acts that you would see at ACL this year. Having no idea any of these bands, tell us what you think the craziest acts you think this year.
And again, you have to keep in mind this comes from a place of not only fundamental but prideful ignorance that I don't know what these bands do. I was looking over that, and there's definitely some days that I would go, because I know 10% of the bands playing on this day, so which is the high watermark at least. Right. Saturday has Sabrina Carpenter, which Jefferson said was Karen Carpenter's granddaughter.
Yeah, he's old.
Yeah, which may or may not be true. I don't know. But no, they also have Pierce the Veil, coming over from the When We Were Young Fest. They have car seat headrest for emo before it was emo. But yeah, I saw there they have a band called Wet Leg.
Wet Leg.
That's so. For all I know, that could be a spoken word group. It could be they could be doing a Blue Man thing. Honorable mention I'd give to probably Spacey Jane.
Spacey Jane.
Yeah.
The couple that I saw were there was Panda Bear, which I'm sure my 3-year-old would love.
It's actually a Panda Bear.
Panda Bear.
That's a conceit.
It also goes with car seat headrest. Another one my 3-year-old might like. I also thought it was interesting. There's a Dr. Dog. I wonder if Dr. Dog and Wet Leg play a duo.
Again, since we're a podcast in the pursuit of truth, I need to point out that it's only an honorary doctorate for Mr. Dog.
And let's not forget South Arcade, which is not to be confused with Animal Arcade. So I wonder if there's an arcade versus arcade battle of the bands.
Well, you gotta be careful because then Arcade Fire comes on, and then there could be casualties.
The arcades. It's like everybody was naming their band after arcades. All right, moving on from ACL. At any rate, we don't go to those things anymore, and we just try to avoid them.
We complain about the traffic a lot.
Yeah, man, I got hit with it on Friday. It had this is how much I didn't even know ACL was going on. I got takeout from a place that's 3 blocks on Friday from the festival.
Sounds like you learned your lesson.
And was halfway driving over there, and I'm like, man, there's a lot of these rickshaw things around for some reason. We have those in Austin, but I was like, there's a bunch of them. Oh no, it's October.
Why is everybody around Zilker Park? Goodness.
All right. Well, enough of the witty banter. We will, if we can call it witty. I want to get to our guest interview. We're very excited to have our guest on the show. Our guest is Ken Pope. He is the CEO of the Coalition for Empowered Education, and he is a senior fellow at the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation. And so the issue we're going to be talking about today is, who is teaching the teachers? This is one of those things, Derek. Mm-hmm. There's been a lot of political back and forth about the indoctrination that goes on in the K through 12, and there's been a lot of effort to try and prevent teachers from doing that kind of thing, with our kids. But I think it's worth stepping back and saying, well, what's going on with the teachers? It's not just the curriculum that's ending up in the classroom, but what's going on with the teachers? And Ken's is here has been looking at this for a while, for at least the last couple of years with his new organization, the Coalition for Empowered Education. Over nearly 35 years, Ken served in the U.S. Army in a variety of roles and in academia. academia. He's taught intelligence, advanced analytics, critical thinking, and national security. But what brings us here today, of course, is his role at the Coalition for Empowered Education. Empowered Ed brings together organizations from a wide range of political, ethnic, religious, and ideological backgrounds, united in a shared mission to oppose dogmatic, politicized agendas in the classroom. And so, Ken, thank you for being here with us. He's remote from Georgia, but thanks for being on the show today.
Thanks. Good to be here. I really enjoyed your back and forth about the bans and the traffic there. That's why I'm in Georgia now, not in D.C. any longer.
Did you recognize any of those bands? Are you up on the
big wet leg fan?
Not a single one. I mean, I think I can't remember the last concert I went to, but it was probably something a little more like Jefferson Starship or something like that. It's been a while since I've been to a major rock concert.
We'll have Jefferson's Place. We built this city over the top of this.
Yeah, that'll work. Do that in post. Okay, well, let's get to a very serious issue, which, of course, is indoctrination in the classroom. And as I mentioned, in the intro, the way legislators have been handling this is sort of this top-down enforcement of, teachers, you can't do X, Y, and Z. And I think one of the things that we've been looking at is, while that's one approach to try and get a handle around it for lawmakers or policymakers to get a handle around it, it sort of ignores the question about, why are the teachers doing this in the first place? And this is something that you've been looking at for a number of years. And so I just want to get your perspective. Let's talk about the colleges of education. How have they changed in terms of what they're emphasizing in teacher prep over the last 5 or 10 years?
Yeah, well, I think I would just go back quite a bit longer than that. It's not just really the colleges of education, it's universities writ large. I mean, I think it started, this since the 1930s, this Frankfurt School critical theory has been kind of coming into our university systems for that long. You've heard the term, the long march through the institution, that was coined by Rudi Deutsch, a West German socialist who was talking about capturing all the institutions. And I think, especially if you look at academia, that I think we could say, with regular confidence that it has been captured by a lot of that ideology. So colleges of education seem to be kind of like the breeding ground for a lot of this stuff. And they focus really, I think where the bulk of the problem comes in is what they're using as their foundational, pieces that help kind of guide the instruction and pedagogy of these teachers are training, which is, Paulo Freire's Pedagogy of the Oppressed and the Politics of Education, where the whole goal there is to use education as a political tool to achieve their socialist or Marxist goals. So Paulo Freire, I mean, even on Wikipedia, calls him the Brazilian socialist who blah 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 does this with his education program. So also it's Howard Zinn's The People's History of America is another key piece that's in those colleges of education. So when that is your foundation, then it's not surprising that we're getting the results we're seeing with our teachers coming out, that they believe this stuff because that's what they've been fed for their 4 years of their educational process.
And now, is this infrastructure that is just that has been put in place decades ago, or is there still a concerted effort on the part of certain individuals that run the universities or that run the colleges? Like this is a conscious thing that is continuing to go on. Like, I'm part of a system that is trying to indoctrinate, our teachers. Do they even know that they're doing it, or is it just because that's what's been done the last 30 or 40 years?
I think a lot of it is just that. I think it's been done so long, it's inculcated into the system or their system that they don't even realize what they're doing anymore. I think, you probably have some true believers who are pushing hard because they think a socialist agenda, Marxist agenda would be better for the nation, definitely better for educating, the students, kind of breeding that next generation of socialists as they come up. But I think it started, many, many years ago. It's kind of been this slow march through the institutions where they fully captured it, especially in the educational departments. And that's where you see some of the most egregious examples of the things that are being taught to teachers, which again is now finding its way clearly in K through 12 education.
And of course, we're sitting here with Dr. Derek Cohen, who is from academia, and you were, you went through graduate school and all of that. I mean, did you experience this kind of thing when you were going through it, and did you know that it was being, that it was coming from a place of ideological agendas and indoctrination?
Well, interestingly enough, so my program was obviously criminology, which is, to be honest with you, is an offshoot of sociology, which is proto-Marxian to our guest's point. But one of the things I would add is I almost think that by the time, and we had some professors at Cincinnati that were definitely fit Mr. Pope's taxonomy, but they were kind of pushing out an open door at that point because the grad students had already basically already been steeped in that, and they spoke the lingua franca of academia. They knew grievance study, they knew their Foucault, they knew all their all the required reading that it takes to get there. And then, interestingly enough, the reason that it really didn't take hold, I think, with the folks who weren't steeped in that, myself included, was the fact that we knew that the theory and the stuff that we were already discussing, we knew it pre-exposure to that stuff. And then again, some of the, especially who would have thought that one of our victimology professors had a pretty cogent victimhood narrative. We knew that going in, or knew the theory going in, and so it never really stuck because that was heterodox by all the criminology that we knew coming into it. The problem is, though, is that there's just not enough people who have that natural defense mechanism against there. And if everybody's moldable clay and you don't have that resistance, then that kinds of be the path of least resistance. And I can tell you, at least for me and several of the other folks, kind of on the right side of the aisle in academia, that's certainly the case.
Yeah, Ken, Derek brings up or he brings up a point that is used by them as a point of pushback, which is that it's not indoctrination, it's exposure or exposing. There's nothing wrong with exposing people to these ideas, which I think all of us, even around this table, would agree that as long as you're exposing people to ideas, but you've got to show both sides. That's what exposure is. How do you tell the difference, or how do you, help people understand the difference between what is exposure and what is indoctrination?
Well, I think you kind of hit on it. I think exposure is you expose folks to the idea. You talk about the theory. Where's this coming from? It's coming from this guy called Karl Marx. If you go all the way back to the antecedent of all this stuff, which is Marxism, socialism, what he was looking for. I think it's okay. You talk about that. What I'm finding is that people who are avowed socialists in a lot of cases have no frame of reference. When you ask them, have you even read anything that Marx wrote? The answer is always no. So they really don't know what they're really advocating for. So I think that's a fundamental problem. I have no issue at all with, in fact, I would welcome it. If they would actually read the Communist Manifesto in these colleges of education, I think you'd have a far fewer of these folks who think that's what they want to get, because even that small document, that pamphlet, lays out some very horrendous things that people who have any concept whatsoever of freedom or independence, or just want to live their own life, that's nowhere in that document. And so I think that's okay. But then you also want to talk about the kind of blessings that we have in this nation that our founders provide us in our foundational documents, which frankly, these teachers and the students don't know any better than they do the doctrine of the ideology of socialism as it was actually written, not how we kind of sugarcoat it and at these universities and say it's really good. That's not the history. There's not a historic discussion of these things as they really are. And I think that's the fundamental problem.
And Ken, I'd like to build off that if I can, because I think you bring up some very good points on kind of the Marxist antecedent of this, the Gramscian march, if you will. And one of the issues that I'd like to point out as a distinction, and to be honest with you, I'm fairly ignorant of myself. So obviously Marxism, at least if taught true to form, as you would say, is obviously one that delineates class struggle, right? It's the haves and the have-nots, rich versus the poor, the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, so on and so forth. Nowadays, the left seems to be more steeped in a a schism of victimology, or or basically, the oppressor and the oppressed, one that's much more like, I tossed Foucault out there earlier, but one that's more of an amorphous power struggle. How did we get from now? And that's not to say that Marx isn't part of the current, the current doctrine. It just seems like a much lesser part. For every one Bernie Sanders, you have several AOCs. In other words, how did we make that leap? Because it seemed like if Marx was just a foot in the door, where did all these other forms of grievance come in to animate the philosophy there?
Well, I think it still goes back to that base set of ideas. If you look at what Marx wrote, he talked about oppressor oppressed. So they just relabeled whoever it is. And it's again, if you look at kind of how things over the last 10, 15 years have fallen out in our country, some of these very contentious social issues that we see. It's LGBTQ rights, and you're going to see certain. I'll fall back to this in a second. So you have that. You have the BLM. You have the 1619. You have now you have the October 7th stuff that we're not celebrating, but recognizing the anniversary of that. If you look out there, the people who are protesting for those key things, you're going to see some very unique signs out there, and they're always there. It's Socialist Party USA, Communist Party USA, the Party for Liberation and Socialism, Revolutionary Communist Party USA. You will see their signs in every single one of those events because they latch on to whatever the crisis du jour is, because they see that as a means to take power, just like Lenin did. In 1917, he saw the country at a crossroads, and he just adopted the theory and cobbled it into what he said it was going to be, using that term, the bourgeois, the oppressor, the oppressed, and it's continue on through its history. They will grab to whatever crisis or any type of divisive idea out there to create conflict in hopes they can gain power through it. So I think that's still there.
Do you think that as they're going through the College of Education, do you think that they are aware, or are they directly told, your job as a teacher is to go be effectively an activist for these policies? Like you're going to be at the front line of changing culture and changing society. Like you have this immense power, and maybe they frame it as a responsibility or an obligation or something, and say, look, you're going to be the front line. The future of the country, or the future of the world is depending on you to go in and shape these minds this way. Do they feel like they're part of that project when you talk to teachers?
I think in a lot of I think they think they're part of a movement. I think, plus it's also so baked into the system now. I don't think they think anything's wrong with that. I think they think that's now the purpose of education, because that's the pedagogy they've been taught with these kind of texts that we've been talking about, the pedagogy of the oppressed, the politics of education, where the goal was to do just that, politicize these children, these kids. And then in order to gain a society that's in their image, which is what they're really after. So I think that's really what it is. I think they've been swimming in it so long, you just don't know that you don't really know. And it's so bad that when I was a college professor, I say it's one of the greatest compliments I ever had as a professor, because it was unique. And some of my kids, at least one or so every semester, would tell me, you know what, we don't know where you stand politically. And I would ask the question, oh, really? So, is that not the norm in every one of your classes? And they go, no, all we talk about is politics. So I think that's where we are, because that's what's going on out there.
I think I was gonna say, I think you've articulated, really hit on kind of where I wanted to go with this, which is, you said that you think that teachers now believe that that's their job, is to go do what I described. And I'll just tell you right now, that's not what parents think the teacher's job is. And I think that's where you have the current fight over this right now, where, with parent empowerment and school choice, and, whether or not to send your kids and your money to the university. That's, how do we get back to a place where because I think this is blindsiding a lot of parents, to find out that their kids, that they're spending, tens of thousands of dollars to send their kids to these indoctrination places, assuming that like the purpose, assuming that like that the teacher's on the same page with them, that they're going to go learn about the world and they're going to be exposed, right? They're going to learn about truth and they're going to be exposed to both sides and they're going to learn critical thinking skills. But that's not what's happening. And I think you really hit on is that nowadays teachers think that is what their job is to shape these minds into a particular ideology, and parents don't believe that's what it is at all. That's what their job should be at all.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, whatever level, for the parents who are paying for it, I would want to know, like for my kids when they went to college, I wanted to know what they were taking. I wanted to know what was going on in the classroom. Now they went to a private Christian college, so that was a little less indoctrination from what they got. But a lot of my friends' parents, or friends who had kids at the university level, that's what they were getting, a lot of stuff. And when my friends would talk to them, that's what they were getting. And I think it permeates a little easier to control, I think, or should be anyway, is what's going on in K through 12, because parents can physically get in there and find out. I would think. I know I did as a parent when my kids were in school. We were there, especially after we had a couple brush ups finding out some of the garbage my kids were being taught. That we just, books that they were not going to read, reports they're not going to write, and I was not very popular with a lot of my kids' teachers.
Yeah, Derek, that we obviously saw that in Texas, and it was shocking that, of course you would expect San Antonio, Austin, places like that, but we were seeing it in rural communities, which is really kind of where we're going with this, is that it's not really about, urban versus suburban versus rural. It's just teachers. I mean, if you're going to go get a certification to be a teacher, you're going to be exposed to this, to what's there. And so whether you go teach at a small rural school or you go teach at, the biggest school in San Antonio, you're going to be one of these little social justice warriors indoctrinating young minds.
Well, not only that, but then they also have support battalions as well. I think one of the things that is almost a trope in the right-wing, online ecosystem is woke librarians, right? Mm-hmm. And then all you need to do is look at their like professional trade associations and look at what some of the materials and titles of panels and stuff they have during those events, and it's all one-sided. It's how to comply with these so-called book bans, which again we've talked ad nauseum, which isn't even banning books, is sometimes just moving them to a different section of the library.
Right.
But all those things is like that is where the professional orientation of that group is turned to. Mm-hmm. It's fighting back against efforts like this. It's not about, making I would say a more well-rounded education, a more classical education, to say the least. But it's about basically how do we engage in the culture wars that were being presented from this particular perspective. Now, look, they might say, oh, we have to because you're trying to, quote unquote, ban these books. That carries no water at all, because from opening till closing, it's all this left-wing indoctrination and all this left-wing orientation. There's not like, there's a panel on how to stock your library so that it has both Burke and Kirk in it, so you get a continuity of conservative thought. Yeah. None of that even accounted. What is the LGBTQ or trans reading list look like, and how do I go about getting that into my library?
Yeah. Ken, before I get into what we can do about all this, do you have a sense of like what the average student who wants to be a teacher, what do they go through? Like when they go to class or when they do homework assignments or projects, like what are they actually working on? I mean, are they learning about different philosophies on how to teach? Or, if you have a student who's not learning and you have other kids in the class that are learning faster, how do you deal with, different learning ability? Like, is that what you're learning as a teacher, or is nothing like that in the school?
Well, I'll be honest with you. I'm not an expert on what goes on specifically in those colleges of education. I'm pretty versed now in what's coming out. What's the product? And I'm also pretty versed in understanding what is being taught in some of these. So I can't really say I know, day to day what's going on. But I will give you an example from two recent events I've done. The first one is the California Social Studies Conference that I went to earlier this year. Now, before I showed up with, CEE, myself, and there was like two other groups there, all the teachers who were going to be in attendance and all the board there, they actually invited us after they figured out, kind of what our, kind of a viewpoint was. They put a note out to all the teachers that said, we have two groups who are coming here who are right-wing, well-funded, and are here to terrorize teachers before we even showed up.
Wow.
And then when we're there, I want to talk to you about two keynotes that I witnessed. The first one by Dr. Kristen Duncan of Clemson University. And one of her opening slides read, and I quote, "Civic education is curricular violence." All right, let that sink in for a second. Civics education is curricular violence. And then it just went downhill from there. But she got, wild rounds of applause. The next evening, the keynote, I don't have the name, but I do remember one of their quotes in one of their opening, comments was, "Social studies is eugenics." Again, these people are coming from all over the country. They had to send proposals to be able to talk about this stuff. Mm-hmm. And that's what they're coming out with. And just when you think, well, that's California, they've kind of got off the rails. Florida. I went recently to a Florida, history teachers conference. And the entire event began with a land acknowledgement and land and labor acknowledgement. Mm-hmm. History. And you would think history teachers ought to know that location we were in has changed hands a bazillion times before the Western colonial settlers ever got there. Mm-hmm. But yet, that's what they blamed. I mean, history, which it boggled my mind in the state of Florida. So that's how far we've kind of gone. Even you said, where you think this would be something that's kind of limited to some of these, what we call more progressive, kind of radical states like California. It's everywhere, even in a state in Florida where they're actually doing a pretty good job legislatively, standards-wise, to teach stuff the right way, but you still got this stuff that should not be anywhere in a history program, that type of stuff.
One of our experts who is on our higher ed department, she did become a teacher. She was trained at Stanford, of course, which is California, but I mean, it's a prestigious university. And she, what got me thinking about this, I mean, I asked her that same question, Ken, and she basically described and said, the first half of it was essentially arguing that I'm a racist, whether I know it or not. And here are all the examples to demonstrate, how you are a racist in your daily life and the way that you think about things and whiteness and all of that. And then the second half of her instruction was how to prevent pushing her own personal biases and racism in the classroom. And so that's what she learned. There was no discussion on how to be a teacher. It was just simply, you're a racist, and we're going to hammer that into you for the first 8 weeks or so and show you every single example and make you think about it constantly about how you're a racist. And then once we move on, once you believe that, we're going to go in and, show you ways in which, and here are the things we're going to teach you, is how to not be a racist in the classroom. And then their only actual, experience, with teaching it all was then they go and they do, I guess, test pilots so I don't know what it's called, but essentially working in the classroom and teaching classes.
Oh, student teaching.
Yeah, student teaching, right, yeah. But of course, there's a monitor, there's like a mentor over there sitting in the corner, critiquing you and making sure that you're not being a racist. But that's all it was. It was racism, it was gender ideology, it was the land acknowledgement stuff. Sex ed, one of her projects was how to teach sex ed in like a fifth grade class, which I think is required in California. I mean, it was just nothing about what you would expect as a parent thinking about, who are the people teaching the teachers, right, and what kind of teacher is my 5-year-old or is my 8-year-old going to have. She didn't learn anything like that, and anything that she actually learned about teaching was through those student teaching courses. And it's just appalling to hear that that's what's going on in our schools today. I want to get into what to do about it. Oh yeah, go ahead. Get your feedback on that.
Yeah, I was just going to say, what's that's bad, and that's very sad. What's even worse is now that teacher's going to go into her classroom or his classroom, and they're going to tell these kids, because virtue of your skin color, you are either a racist or you have no hope because the system is rigged against you. And I think that is, beyond dereliction of duty for anybody in a position of authority over students, in K through 12, or heck, even at the university level. It's not accurate. It's a complete misunderstanding of how history works and what's going on. And when I tell people when we get these type of conversations, you know what, guys, it ain't 1765, 1865, or even 1965. We have gone so much farther beyond all this stuff that it's not even we're not even on the same planet about where we are with this stuff. And yet you're trying to go back and that's how you define people is by the color of their skin. Which there was a pretty famous guy who said that's not probably how you should do it, but maybe look at the content of their character. He probably got it right. These guys are definitely not.
Very true. So tell me a little bit about CEE and what your organization is doing to combat this directly or head on.
Right. So it's both it's CEE and also Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation, where I'm also doing work there too. It's a kind of a joint effort. But really, what we're trying to do is work on teacher professional development, because right now, we've come to the conclusion right now we're not going to have much of an impact on colleges of education for a long time. We still want to get there eventually, but what we're doing with CEE is really focusing on teacher professional development and their training. Every teacher across the country has a number of hours they have to fulfill in order for promotion and the like. So what we're doing is we're working with school districts and just other groups, foundations, to go out and do this development training with the teachers, as opposed to some of the other stuff they've been getting, which is 1619 or BLM sponsored things, or you pick it. Some of it we've seen some other liberated ethnic study things that are going in as part of their PD. What we're trying to do is we have three programs or three modules of our training, which is the first one is critical thinking, because frankly there's not a whole lot of that going on right now. And I taught that at the university level. And one of the first things that we want to do is kind of open the teacher's mind that, heaven forbid, that what you think about things or how you think about things might not be right. And we want to talk to you about, some of the inherent biases we all have, how, kind of the process of how we go about thinking, sources of information, how we can kind of validate those, and the concept of there are such things as truth, facts and reality. And then once we've done that, we've hoped that we've kind of opened their mind to hear what's going to come next, the next two modules, which the first one is competing political ideologies. So we're going to discuss all these ideologies that so many of our young people think they want, especially the teachers. In a lot of cases, a lot of teachers I've spoken to in various either K-12 schools or even at the university level, what I'm hearing is, well, I think I'm a socialist, and they can't tell me why. And I think that's part of the thing we want to fix, is we want to discuss these ideologies. We only use primary source documents or interviews with people who've experienced it. And that's it. There is no an opinion about what somebody thought about, what Marx did. It's what Marx said, what his relatives said, and all these other ideologies from, Mao, Lenin, Stalin, Hitler. We go through all of it. And then we have a moderated panel discussion with people who lived, as I kind of like to jokingly say, lived the socialist dream in these repressive regimes. People from the Cambodia killing fields. We use a young lady named Channy Lau quite often for that. And then Soviet Union, China, North Korea, others. And then the final one we spend the bulk of our time is on U.S. civics. Not, how do you make a bill, but how did our founders come about creating the foundational documents that we have now that provide us a range of rights and benefits as citizens of this nation that is really literally the envy of the world, that we just don't appreciate because we don't understand it. And we spend the bulk of our time there. So that's what we're trying to do to help teachers think about things a little bit differently, to get the politicization out of the classroom. If you're going to talk politics in the classroom, at least be informed and understand what you're talking about. So that's our training program that we put together.
And how do people get signed up for this? I mean, I'm guessing that the blue-haired teacher with the trans flag is not going to come walking through your doors voluntarily.
So it's we've had we have school districts reach out to us. We have foundations. We did a foundation event up in West Virginia with Cardinal Institute. Did one with them, and we're looking at scheduling different events in different states now. We're just always on the lookout for people who want to do the training. Also in Florida, we're looking there as well. Hopefully up in Texas as well.
Derek, can we Is there a legislation to mandate that all these teachers go through this re-education that Ken's offering?
I don't know. I don't know if you can think of a clean bill that'll undo the kind of Clockwork Orange setup that it sounds like it's going on at the teaching schools. But I mean, we've talked to other folks, obviously folks in our policy shop that, for example, the schools of education. I know that's has a sweet spot in a soft spot in Mandy's heart, to say it lightly. But I kind of agree with Ken when he's saying that it's the product coming out of there is one that it almost pre-exists the issue. And so dealing with that, I think that obviously we also have alternatives is licensing and certification. We can beat that one to death, but that's more of an in-depth thing. But I do think that breaking the stranglehold that the schools and their constituent, we'll say, activist groups have over the process itself is something that would go a long way to do that. At the very least, it might bring things a little more centrist. For example, you're not going to, even if you get a magic wand and everything goes your way, you're not going to start putting out a bunch of G.K. Chestertons and stuff like that. But you are going to have a much better product and a much more diverse product. And as we know, diversity is one of the required elements of conservative thought. You're going to have a better product for it. And I think that that's going to be the important thing about addressing these, even in what limited statutory capacity we can.
Ken, is there a grassroots element here? I mean, have you ever experienced where at a grassroots level in maybe some of the redder states like your Georgia or Florida or Texas, where you could have a grassroots effort at a district level or something to say, hey, we think there's a real problem with our teachers not knowing that communism is bad and that capitalism is good or, whatever. Is there a grassroots effort to try and get people to use your program and to bring you into these districts? It's something from a bottom up rather than a top down.
Yeah, and that's really kind of how the coalition came about, because it came about by, I told you about some, we talk about the moderated panel, people who live the socialist dream, so to speak. So what we have are those very groups, those people who came out of these systems. And surprisingly, a lot of it's in California, Silicon Valley, where you have a lot of people who came out of Vietnam, Cambodia, all those places in China, where they came out of the worst of these systems, and they're seeing that in their classrooms. And also, we have folks in the Soviet Union. One of the lady we deal with quite a bit, she's very active in California. She did a big event with us a couple of years ago, and she was going, after she finished her education in the Soviet Union, she came to the U.S. and she called it her second communist education at UC Berkeley. Jeez. And she said she goes, the only thing that was different was at least the teachers or the professors in the Soviet Union no longer believed the garbage they were spewing. At Berkeley, they did. And that was the difference.
They're more communist in America at our universities. Is there, kind of closing here a little bit, I always like to try and end on a positive note. But are there other programs and universities that you know of that are doing it the right way, that are, there's a lot of talk, at least at the K through 12 level, about getting a classical education, and some charters and other, private schools are offering, what's known as a classical education. Are there universities that are doing that where you might recommend, parents look at?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of them a couple examples of the classical that I think I would definitely want to send my kid to if I was doing it again would be, Hillsdale. I think they have a great program that is, they do it the right way. It's classical critical thinking at its best, focused on the topics. I mean, they go out and they look at all sides of it. I think UATX is just starting down there in Austin with you guys. I think that's probably going to go pretty well as well. I think they've got the right people in place and they've got the right ideas. And I think a lot of the some of the Christian universities too that are kind of leaning toward that classical model is what I would be looking for. Mm-hmm. And I would look at the states too. That there's some states now that are doing away with DEI, which is a good first step in their higher education. I think it's Florida's doing it. Ohio, I think, recently did that. I think Oklahoma is trying to do it. And I believe, I can't recall exactly because I've been dealing with so many states of late. I think Texas is moving toward that too, if they haven't done it already. So I'm hope that gives me hope. The problem I see with that is you can mandate that to happen, but it can be relabeled and still be there. And they will. You see some examples probably with some of these undercover reports where, they say we're still doing it. We just call it something different. And I think that's what you always have to be on guard for. And people, we need to go out and check. That's one of the biggest things is accountability. People at the school board level, parents, politicians need to go out and stroll through the university, stroll through K through 12 and find out what is actually being taught. Is what my intention when I wrote the legislation or the standards or the curricula, is it being met? I had a classic example in Florida doing an event. They came to the museum and they were told that by law now is they have to teach the history of communism. Well, some of the teachers did just that, and they taught communism, how to be one, and that's what they were doing. And
communism's awesome. That's what they taught about the history of communism.
It's not the people you think. So it was the Florida high school debate team. They came to the museum up in D.C. when I was still living up there. And I gave a lecture, Communism, Marxism 101. And for the next 90 minutes, and that is no exaggeration on time, I was being, kind of gnawed on by these students and worse yet, teachers and debate coaches about why we shouldn't give up on communism.
Man, I can't believe that happens in America today. That's crazy.
Yeah, that was billed as the best of those students of the state. And that's pretty frightening. And these teachers had not gone through some professional development training that Florida DOE actually did, their summer civics series, which was phenomenal. I highly recommend, getting online, looking at that. I can put you in contact with some of the folks who led that effort. Sadly, that's been kind of pulled back, but that was a phenomenal program that did it right.
Why do teachers have to go through the College of the College of Education at all? Like, why can't you go in, be a subject matter expert, right? Like, get a history degree, get a math degree, get a science degree, and then how hard is it to then figure out how to become a teacher? Like, it can't be more than a semester or two. Like, why don't we have something where you can you go in and you become a subject matter expert, and then if you want to be a teacher, there's kind of like a side program that you can do that doesn't require you to go on and spend 3 years at a college of education or however long it takes, that you can just, learn the, whatever it is, 15 hours, 18 hours, 20 hours that you need to learn how to, to prepare you for what to do in the classroom. But you start out being a subject matter expert.
Well, it's because of this false notion that the credential bestows knowledge of how to teach any subject, right? Again, and that's when I say it's this false representations, because that's not what these schools are doing. So you go, if I have a degree from a school of education, I must know how to educate. I must be an educator. Well, no, it's really, everything steeped in this socialist or Marxist milieu that we were talking about. The issue, though, of course, is that subject matter expertise, and I will say this kind of can go both ways. Whether or not you're a good teacher does not you don't have to be a subject matter expert if you're doing, science in second grade. You don't have to have a PhD or, an advanced degree in science. What you could do, though, and what these schools of education should be doing, is just classroom management, really teaching these students at that point how to go into the elementary schools and get the information across whatever. Look, we've done here in Texas, the Bluebonnet curriculum, our high quality instructional materials work. We have many things that support teachers who might not have, a natural expertise in a particular area. We have things that they can bring to bear, presuming that they have the ability to do so, that they learned that in their college of education. To Mr. Pope's point, that is not what we're doing. That is not at all the what's coming out of these schools. In fact, they're just indoctrination factories to turn, basically K through 12 or higher education into indoctrination factors.
I mean, imagine if you the way we taught people to drive was you sat in a classroom and you learned about like which cars are cool and which cars aren't cool, or the history of cars. And then
that actually sounds kind of sick.
But then in order to learn how to drive, they gave you the keys to a car and they said, hey, see you on the road, make sure. I mean, that's what it sounds like they're doing with teachers, is that they're wasting all this time in the college of education and then they're just putting them in a classroom and saying, okay, well, now you got to learn how to teach.
Well, it's not only that, but then with the student education, or I'm sorry, the student teaching part tends to be, it's even worse than that, because you do have your blockleiter right there. You do have your person enforcing your commissar next to you enforcing ideological compliance. And that is where the real, I think some of the real damage is done.
Ken, what can parents, are there other signs that parents can look for, whether it's in their, in the classrooms or, meeting with the teachers or the classroom assignments, that'll give them the clues or the red flags that their child is not getting the full and well-rounded, particularly in the social studies and civics and history classes, that they're not getting the full-rounded education that they deserve?
Yeah, I think there's several. I mean, one of the practices we made, as a family when, the kids were in school was we, at every meal that we had together as a family dinner, we would talk about what went on in class. What are you working on? What are you studying? Are there any problems? Let me see what you're reading. Let me see your reading list. Let me see the history. And some of those things were appalling. We found in one case where when my youngest daughter, my middle daughter, when she said she's not comfortable telling me what she was reading, which prompted me to say, well, go get the book and point to me what you don't feel comfortable reading. And then I read this particular passage in English literature that was about a father fantasizing about having sex with his daughter. That was what my daughter was reading.
And what grade was that?
That was 6th grade.
Oh.
And luckily I had an evening to calm down before I went to school the next day to figure out what was going on in that school. And I was told, well, that's what do you recommend we read, Jane Austen? I go, well, yeah, that might be actually considered a classic. This is not. This is basically pornography, and these kids are sexualized enough. They don't need to be worrying about their dad looking at them that way. And my daughter will not read that book. So I think you have to get involved at that level. Just, talk about what your kids, then go to the classroom. There was one incident where my wife she went and sat in a classroom for a few days because we were concerned about another one of our kids, and what they were hearing in the classroom. So I think parents need to be involved. I mean, despite what some of these states and districts and schools will tell you, or the school boards, they're your kids, and you have a responsibility to ensure they get the proper education that you're paying a lot of money through taxes to support. And I think that's where, parents, it's a two-way street. You've got to support good teachers. You need to hold other teachers who are not doing what they should be or doing it wrong accountable. And you need to be, vocal at school board meetings. Don't put up with subpar education. Mm-hmm. When you've got 12th graders graduating now, according to the, National Assessment of Educational Progress, 12th graders are leaving school, only 35% can read at grade level, and only 23% can do math. That there's a problem because they're spending a lot of time doing something besides math, reading, history. It's even worse, and civics even worse across the board. So something is taking place besides the foundational elements of our education that we need to really hold our teachers accountable for and stop the politicization of our kids.
I want to highlight something that you said there, though, because I think the left always attacks the right by saying, "Oh, well, you don't care about public education, or you're attacking public education. You don't want to fund it, or you want to privatize it." The answer is no. What you experience with you clearly seeing something that is not right, that a 6th grader is reading this, this adult material, and that you, as a concerned father, went to school to then find out what's going on. It's not like you walked in there with a baseball bat and started smashing windows. You go in there and you ask them to explain what's going on here. And instead of sitting you down and having an adult conversation where they either try to, justify it and here's what's going on, or, what would be better is to understand your concern and to try and work something out with you. Either one of those avenues would be fine. But instead, what you experienced was pushback. That you're an idiot. You don't understand what's going on here. Well, what do you want me to do? Teach Jane Austen and treat you with that kind of disrespect. That is why conservatives are doing what they've been doing the last 5 years, is because that has been our experience when we go and we talk to teachers or we talk to educators or superintendents or school boards, is they turn off our mics, they call us terrorists and whatever. That's where the pushback is coming from. It's not because we hate public education or some nonsense. It's because that's what we experience when we go and we try to have a rational conversation about what's going on in the schools, and we get treated like that with disrespect.
Yeah.
All right.
And it's just, but it's a matter
I'll
of
get off my soapbox for a minute.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead, Ken. I'll let you finish.
No, I'm just saying it's a matter of, standing your ground. I mean, we were right in that case. But there's some parents who go in there and they go off half-cocked because they don't understand what's going on. And some kids, have a disciplinary problem and they go in there, the parents trying to figure out why. So it's a two-way street. I think we should recognize good teacher behavior and good teachers, praise them publicly whenever you can, send them a note and do right by them because they have a hard job. But by the same token, if you got stuff like I experienced, they probably thought I was going to be like a lot of parents and just walk away with my tail between my legs. That's not my makeup. And I wasn't going to do that because there was too much riding on that. So I just told the teacher, I will pick the book my daughter will read for this class, not you, because this is unacceptable.
Well, thank you for doing that. Where can our audience find more about your organization, Coalition for Empowered Education?
Yeah, so we are online at cee.org. It's on our we have a website. We have material out there. We also, I would point you toward Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation as well. Also, we have a website that has a lot of witness videos for people who think they want to enjoy, socialism. Again, I tell people frequently that it's very easy to be a socialist in this country. You need to try it somewhere where it's mandatory and see how you like it then.
I doubt they would very much. Well, Ken Pope, thank you so much for spending some time with us. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching our podcast today. And as we always like to say on the end of our Right Idea podcast, in the immortal words of Sam Houston, do good and risk the consequences. We'll see you next time.